welcome to this very special episode of Wide Angle. Around the world, as we see the rise of majoritarian politics over the last few years, there have been heated, volatile debates around the definitions of nationalism, secularism and liberalism. One defines identity and nation, the other perhaps frees us to follow our own fates as we would like to, and liberalism is premised on the commitment to protect minorities. In India too, we've been seeing many of these debates take place, one very recently on the pages of a mainstream national daily, but also the beauty of liberalism perhaps is the fact that there is space for debate, there is space for disagreement, and from those debates and disagreements, can we find ways to come to a new common understanding in these difficult times? I'm joined by two heavyweights of intellectual thought in India, Guha, who has talked about the rights of Dalits, minorities and Adivasis through his academic work, and Mander, who has done the same through his activism. And both of you have been speaking out very vocally on these issues over time, but we've seen a new phase of that debate. And one would argue that perhaps, Mr. Guha, let me start with you, that you took the definition of liberalism as you see it perhaps a little too far when you talked about likening the burqa to the trishul. You say it's one statement that's been misinterpreted perhaps in what you were trying to say. Mander, you talked about the Congress party and what it was saying about the public being brainwashed, that it's being seen as a Muslim party. Where can we come and find common agreement on this critical issue? Guha, what do you think is the critical problem you're trying to address?
You know, Maya, I hesitate always, and this may be because I'm a scholar and not a change maker and activist, at ever singling out a single important issue. There are multiple layers, multiple issues. So clearly the rise of Hindutva majoritarianism is a major threat to Indian democracy and Indian pluralism. How do you tackle it? That was the essence of the debate. You know, that statement of mine on burqa and trishul was a careless one, and it was unfortunate, and it sort of hijacked the debate away from what are the larger issues of finding a common ground, and also the importance of reflective, open-minded liberalism in all communities. You know, I think that was really where I had hoped the debate would go, and some of it has gone that way and some of it has not. So I think it is, let's be clear about this, that you know, we have multiple fault lines in our society, in Indian society. We are an old civilization but a new nation, an emerging democracy. One fault line is Hindu versus Muslim. Another fault line could be upper caste against low caste. A third fault line is of course men against women. And a fourth fault line, which is emerging slowly and which I feel living in Bangalore, is north versus south. Right. And I think it's important for us as we move forward to recognize all these fault lines and try and find ways of overcoming them.
So, Mander, it was your piece that actually has triggered this wave of reading for most of us actually on the pages of the Indian Express, and I think it's opened up a great space for these conversations to be had, because we're living in a world where there is a new vocabulary that imbues persecution, hate, you know, the rejection of whatever we've seen as the norms up to now, by various segments who see themselves as having a stake or having been left out, as the case may be, of political processes. So, what is it that you were actually trying to say in your argument? Did you envisage, did you foresee the kind of debate that would take place subsequently?
I envisaged that there would be a debate, but not the one that Ram raised. And I do believe that, you know, as I see each of the pieces that come out, I do want to go back to one central question that I wanted to raise and debate. That was that I think that the Muslim community in India has never been as isolated, and there's a sense, you know, we take out the Karwan-e-Mohabbat was a response to this. I've traveled now to 10 states, I've met families, I've talked to people, I work with a lot of Muslim people. I've never seen this intense sense of fear, everyday fear and despair in the lives of ordinary Muslims across gender, across class, across caste, across the country. So this was one. The second was that I wanted to say that at this moment of time, I feel that we have to look at the culprit. Why have we come to this place? And there is a role, obviously, of the BJP and the RSS, and of the leadership, because I think that what is more obvious is that I almost called it command hate, which is really because it's hate which we see with Trump, we see with our own Prime Minister, which is a hate which is legitimized by the top leadership, and people are acting out hate. The kind of lynchings that we've seen. I was just back from Bengal. I mean, you have these 3 boys, their bodies came back with their genitals sort of bashed with stones. I mean, these are strangers. You have people's eyes gouged out. Where is this hatred? So I'm just wanted to say that we see the role of the BJP and the leadership, but I was wanting to say that no, I think there's something more that we have to worry about. What about the rest of us? What is the role that so-called secular political parties are playing, and they're wanting more and more to not stand. I mean, and the Congress party I mentioned because I noticed over and over again, they're not, even Rahul Gandhi's recent speech, it spoke about jobless growth, it spoke about the agrarian crisis, which are the 2 crises. It did not talk about rising hate. He talked at length about UNA, but he did not talk about the lynchings of the other kind. So it is secular civil society, secular political parties, and I found even with civil liberty groups, nobody wants to be seen with the Muslim. So this was the debate that I wanted to bring in about, there are culpabilities, there are problems within the Muslim community, there are problems in the Hindu community, there are problems in all of them. But here, the debate that I was wanting to have was really about outside the Muslim community, why have we allowed our brothers and sisters in this country to fall into this situation?
So, Guha, is that a debate that we can possibly have? Because as you say, one line in your article ended up hijacking that larger debate.
Absolutely.
Now, when we're using the word secularism, for example, in the way we understand it connotatively, literally, as the case may be, many people are opting to use the word pluralism in place of secularism. What do you think is the definition or the distinction between the two, and is that a debate that one should be having?
Well, I think I'm happy. I think pluralism is probably marginally preferable, but I completely agree with Harsh that over the last 3 years, particularly 3.5 years since the rise of the BJP in the center, this has emboldened majoritarian groups, and the fact that there's been no pushback from the central leadership. Vajpayee after 2002 said Raj Dharma. After 2002, one of the forgotten aspects of 2002, which I'd like to recollect for many people, Harsh knows about it, but others have forgotten, is when the riots happened in Gujarat in 2002. One of the most remarkable interventions that was not followed up was by Nanaji Deshmukh, who was a Rajya Sabha member of originally the RSS, who said the Prime Minister Vajpayee and the leader of the opposition Sonia Gandhi should go together to Gujarat. So there was that humanity within an old RSS leader like Nanaji Deshmukh who could come to the freedom movement and so on, right? Had seen Gandhi's martyrdom. Now that is gone. There's a brash, ruthless, amoral, masculine hatred, hyper-masculine hatred. So that is absolutely, and that is extremely worrying. It's of course more visible in North India than it is in South India, though I hope it doesn't come to South India, or in fact I hope it gets rid in South India.
Coastal
Karnataka is the exception, is the exception. So I think this is a real issue. Now, I'm a historian, so I have, obviously Harsh and I would say broadly, philosophically, politically, we are on the same page. Because I am a scholar, he is more of an activist, may have different perceptions and orientations. As a historian, I would like to say, many years ago, say 25, 30 years ago, some scholars, whom I shall not name, made a facile distinction between Nehruvian secularism and Gandhian secularism. And they said, Gandhian secularism is true and Nehruvian secularism was anti-religion, arrogant and so on, right? Now what we really need, and even then I thought, and I wrote modestly about it, of course those days what I wrote had no traction, even if I said sensible things. Now if I don't say sensible things, it has too much traction. All right, that's a separate question. But I believe now what we need today is a combination of Nehruvian and Gandhian secularism. I'll explain what I mean by that. Yeah. Nehru was Prime Minister, so he had to operate at the level of the state. So he had to stay, when there is communal violence, the state will be impartial and stop it. And that's happened in several cases, and not necessarily in Congress regimes. In my home state of Karnataka, we had a socialist chief minister called J.H. Patel, who in other respects was a bad chief minister, but he stopped the Baba Budangiri Hills becoming a southern Ayodhya. So the state has to make sure that there is no communal, when there is some tension, it's controlled. Yeah. But at the level of civil society is where you need Gandhian secularism. And one of the great failures of the Gandhian movement, again I speak as a historian, was that Nehru was in many ways an admirable Gandhian when it came to Hindu-Muslim harmony, Hindu-Muslim, Sikh, Christian harmony at the level of the state. But at the level of civil society, the Gandhians abdicated the Gandhi message. Gandhi died in 1948. In the 50s and the 60s, those Gandhians who were in civil society did nothing. In fact, they even got involved in ridiculous campaigns, prohibiting alcohol, prohibiting X, Y, Z. But they forgot that aspect of Gandhian, communal harmony. Now, people like Harsha are reviving it on the ground, Harsha and many others like that. But those 30 or 40 years in which the Gandhians failed Gandhi, I believe Nehru did not fail Gandhi at the level of the state. And so we need both. One is not enough. Harsha is right when he urges the Congress party to not be so instrumental and Machiavellian in their politics. Right. I am probably right when I deplore the fact that Modi is not Vajpayee. Vajpayee had more humanity about this. But we need both. We need, a combination of Gandhian civil society secularism and state impartiality must both go together.
So let me just, before I come back to you, I just want to follow up very quickly on this, because when we are talking about Gandhian secularism or Nehruvian secularism, how the state may or may not control or can control. One of the aspects that we all sort of bring into the conversations on secularism is the symbolism or the symbols of religion or identity. The burqa is one of those symbols. Correct. And you'll have a vast number of people on the right actually now suddenly agree with you because you made this one point about the burqa. And yet you had some of these people who, when France wanted to ban the turban or the kripan, they were up in arms about how religion has its own place and symbols must not be tampered with. So how do you rationalize this argument?
Maya, nuance is critical. Nothing is black and white when it comes to symbolism, all right? In 800 words, you don't have the time to explain everything. But a headscarf is not a burqa. A turban is not a burqa. A vibhuti is not a burqa, all right? So I would say in public spaces, in political rallies, I think there is a problem with the burqa. A turban, a vibhuti, a skull cap, but the burqa separates you. I mean, and it's not me. Please read what Ambedkar says about the burqa. If I hide my face from you, how can we be part of a shared political project? The French went the other extreme. When the French debate on the hijab was going on, I gave a talk in the University of Calicut, which is in Kerala, and there were 400 students at my talk. At least 80 were in the hijab because that allowed them to come out. So nuance is critical, and I think that was lost in at least my statement. And I still do believe that that there is an issue when full political, and it is forget me. Just read what Ambedkar says about the importance of fraternity. So I think nuance is critical, but if there's a larger question, it's not. You see, as I said. Unfortunately, the debate went in a certain direction. It's about attitude, it's about perception, it's about interfaith dialogue, it's about the obligations of the state. Let me give one last example of the state, because this is again something I personally. In 1984, I was a student in Kolkata. I was doing a PhD in Kolkata. And you will recall the bloody pogroms against Sikhs all over northern India, right? And in Kolkata, there were 30,000 Sikh taxi drivers with the turban. But Jyoti Basu, who had been a young activist in Kolkata when Gandhi went on fast in 1947, said not one of them will be harmed, and not one of them was harmed. So it's
it's the state.
It's very, very important. Jyoti Basu was, in many other respects, may have been a bad chief minister. He didn't do enough for education and agriculture, but because he recognized that, if you tell the police, they'll do it. I mean, Harsh has been an IAS officer; he knows it. I mean, he has dealt with such situations himself.
So let me bring that to you, because taking forward what he's just said, it is true that Ambedkar in his writings also had talked about the Muslim community in India needing to modernize. Now that ties in with another debate. Again, we saw Ashutosh Varshney refer to it in the pages of the Indian Express. We talked about ethnic and civic nationalism. It's a concept I studied in international relations, in 20 years ago. Do you think that the French concept, the European concept of civic identity being your predominant definer is something that we need to find a way to incorporate? Because otherwise India with its various communities, I don't know what the answer is. So
I've thought about this a lot, and in fact there's a book in my head which I'm sort of figuring out, which I want to call Ways of Belonging. The title is very clear. I believe, what is secularism? To my mind, secularism is the freedom to be myself, to follow my beliefs and practices, and belong equally. There is no, I will not have to conform to belong equally. The tribal people in Arunachal who speak, only 300 people speak a particular language, they dress in a certain kind of way, they're equally Indian. And I think we have to allow the diversity of people to follow their beliefs. So that's the first premise. But there are two other premises. The second premise is that, but this freedom is not unlimited, unconditional.
okay.
But the conditionalities is not majoritarian sentiment as it is in France or in India as we are growing, but the larger constitutional values. So if I'm free to be myself, to eat, to drink, to dress, to love, to worship in whatever way I want, but it has to be within the framework of constitutional morality, and which includes gender justice, and it includes many other things. So that is there, and that the state's responsibility in the Nehruvian state thing, I feel it has not only the right but also the obligation to intervene in religious practices where they contravene constitutional morality, and yet you defend minorities. And finally, that the idea is equal respect for every faith, including the absence of faith. So that's the sort of frame that I want to, a nuanced idea about what secular practice is, combining the Gandhian and the Nehruvian ideas that we have there. The problem with how I felt our debate panned out is that I have no doubt that the gentleman who I was quoting, when he said he didn't want women to come in burqas and men to come in skull caps in his meetings, was actually not saying it because he had a problem with the burqa, but he didn't want markers of identity. It's like somebody in Bangladesh saying, I don't want Hindu women to come with a sindoor. That is really the parallel. Now the debate about, so that is something that to me is, first let us recognize that we all have the freedom to be ourselves, and to work within.
So what you're saying is basically that your own symbols should not become a source of threat to you.
No, to threat to you or to anybody else.
Yeah.
Because Junaid was attacked because he looked Muslim. Most of the people we see who've been killed in these lynchings are being killed because they look Muslim. Now,
and they can be easily targeted.
And so mothers are telling their children, don't wear a beard, don't wear a skull cap in a public place, don't respond salam alaikum. And I think that then we are losing everything that India stands for.
Which is interesting. That's what happened in 1984 when you see a lot of Sikh families in Delhi. They relinquished their.
No, I have no disagreement.
No argument with that.
With any of that. But it is a complicated issue.
Yeah.
I think Harsh raised the issue of gender justice, and there is a real issue there. I think there are parts of India, Kerala being one, my hometown of Bangalore being another, Kashmir being a third, where the burqa is making a massive revival. Now, one of the most, and one has to look at this also, I agree, partly sympathetically. In my view, one of the most interesting aspects of the debate, one of the most non-polemical pieces was by Harman's Mukhia, who talked about the development of a siege mentality. And the siege mentality that is being developed among the minorities is partly because of Hindutva persecution and partly because of global developments. They have been the unwitting victims of Cold War rivalries. I mean, the Soviets invade Afghanistan, the Americans invade Iraq. So, and some of what is happening as a sociologist,
conversation on Islamophobia,
you can understand that and why people are retreating into the burqa. But in the long term, we have to find a way how it is done, of course, many people have, of getting women of all communities into the school, into the college, into the workplace, so that women can become, as some women have, but not enough women have in India, editors, CEOs, Supreme Court justices, chief ministers. And I think this is also part of the conversation, which I feel is very important, and has to be conducted across communities.
So one other part of the conversation, and again, sort of the way we're seeing, you've had a lot of commentary ever since certainly 2016 when Trump came to power about the illiberal liberal. How they are so rigid in their intellectual superiority, or they feel, knowledge was dismissed, or the fact that we talked about the commitment to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is something that's seen as a problem. Now, are we looking at a world, are we looking at, in the Indian context, where even liberals, I'm using the word loosely here, but in general, people who believe in constitutional values, in the upholding rule of law, is there a division that's taking place, and therefore you have people on the right saying, oh, you guys can't come to terms on any one thing, and you expect us to take what you're saying seriously? I don't know, because there's a whole conversation taking place about how liberals are divided. I don't know whether you've heard it and what sense you make of it.
I have no issue about, we look at the history of the Congress party or the history of the freedom struggle. I mean, there are always debates going on. You learn from each other's debates, and I think that should be the way to go. I think what is worrying is name calling.
Yeah.
For example, say in this debate, several people called me an apologist for the RSS, which will be news to the publicly in the Indian Express, at least 3 people, which will certainly be news to the RSS, forget it being news to me or anyone else, right? So, I think that is what is important in debates to avoid name. But debate, you cannot have a standard view. I mean, only the extreme right and the extreme left believe in ideological indoctrination. And many,
in a sense, they mirror each other.
Of course, many years ago I said this in 1999, when long before Smriti Irani became education minister, Murli Joshi became education minister and was putting his own people. And I wrote a piece where I became unpopular, where I said Murli Joshi is the Leninist of the right, because that's what they do. I mean, Harsh and it's wonderful that you're having this conversation, because on most things we agree, and there are things we have not talked about. For example, one thing I'd like to lay on the table now, and I think Harsh will entirely endorse what I'm saying, is debates about fault lines in India are about the persecution of Muslims, the suppression of women, and the exploitation and discrimination against Dalits, right? Yeah. And we talk about these 3 things all the time. But in some ways, there's a 4th group which is invisible, which Harsh has worked with and I have worked with, who are the Adivasis, who don't even figure in conversations, right? So I think unless we expand the boundaries, and have these conversations, so I'm glad we're having this conversation. We'll all learn from it, as long as it's, it's about arguments and ideas and not about personal, motives. And that's the difference between people in the middle ground and the people on the extreme left and extreme right. They know the truth already.
So, Harsh Mander, how do we create spaces where there are more people in the middle ground? Because at the end of the day, the fact that both of you wrote what you thought, there's been heated debate, but neither of you have actually participated in any of those conversations taking place. It's great to actually have both of you at the table together, because do you think this will kind of also put to rest this whole narrative, as I asked Ram Guha, about how liberals are divided and they don't have their act together. So if they can't get their act together, why should anyone listen to them?
No, I think that, as he said, debate and the civility of debate. Because one of the many things, the leaderships that I talked about earlier, I think there are 3 things that leaders like Trump and Modi have done. The first of them is to legitimize prejudice and hatred in a way that hasn't happened in the past. The second,
in those countries, it has happened in other countries,
but in those
countries, those great democracies.
The second, there's been a peculiar moral inversion, and I think that where the majority community, the whites there, the Hindu upper caste here, is being seen as the persecuted, not the oppressor. And it is the minorities, the people of color who have become the persecuted. Likewise, it's the middle and the rich who pay taxes, who are actually not the dominant group. We are suffering because we pay taxes, and the poor are sort of exploiting us. So they've created this moral inversion. And the third is an extraordinary destruction of civility of discourse and debate. And I think that the whole business about being liberal is being respectful, that I don't know everything, Ram doesn't know everything, and we learn from each other, and we modify, we listen to each other, we nuance our debate. So I think that is there. But I would still like to sort of just say, I think in the fault lines, firstly, there's a fifth fault line, which is the economic fault line of jobless growth, the crisis of neoliberal capitalism to create work, young people having no futures, the agrarian crisis. So that's just sort of
taking it even further.
Taking it further. So I think that's a fifth fault line that we need to address. But secondly, I do feel that among all of these crises at this moment, I would put the crisis of jobless growth and the agrarian crisis on the one hand, and the crisis of the religious minorities, Muslims and Christians in tribal areas, and the sense of fear that they're living with as unprecedented. And I feel that we need to put these into the middle of this discussion, and even in our discussions about other disagreements, let's not lose sight of that central crisis that India is facing.
So I'd just like to reflect a little bit on what Harsh said about the similarities, because these are the two great multicultural, plural democracies of the world. I mean, these are both extraordinary human experiments.
Largest and oldest democracies of the world. We hear that all the time.
Not the largest nor oldest, Maya. The diversity of people who live together, right? And I think, and the quality of civic engagement, debate, reflection, and I think if America collapses and India collapses, the whole world will collapse, And I think that's very, very important. And which is where I think what Harsh is saying, the two or three things he's saying. So firstly on this, the anthropologist Stanley Tambaya, writing about the Sri Lankan civil war 20 years ago, said the Sinhala are a majority with a minority complex. Okay, that's the Hindus here and the whites there. They control everything, 80%. They're disproportionately represented in the armed forces, in the professions, in the media, yet they feel they're persecuted, they're being shafted. It's bizarre. So it's astonishing, it's contrary to all facts, logic, ethics, but it's there. It's mystifying, I mean, anyone who reads the Sachar Committee reports and the documents there knows that Muslims are not being appeased. They're doing dreadfully on all counts, right? So that is, and that has been exacerbated by the really awful and hateful, I would say almost anti-national leadership of Trump and Modi. Anti-national meaning anti-American and anti-Indian. The arrogance, the spite, the vindictiveness that the person at the top displays. Now, as I said.
And we are coping with that. And so
so George Bush made many foolish things, but he was not vicious and vindictive like Trump. Vajpayee had a certain civility to him. They have disagreed with his policy. Can I give you one example, if I may, about Modi? I was recently in rural Karnataka. I was going to Dharwad, and I had gone many years ago. I had gone on train, and I was going by road, and the roads are top class. And I ate in rural Karnataka, roads are top class. And I thought to myself, I said, why doesn't Modi say Atalji ne ye kiya hai? Because he can't even praise even his own predecessor. So this kind of extraordinary megalomania and egotism that unites the two most influential leaders in the world, I think is produces this animosity, this hatred, this bhaktud that we all see.
And just on another note, because we have to wrap this discussion, the fact that there is currency for these views of these majoritarian leaders has also led to its own impact on political oppositions. We've seen, for example, with the statements from the Congress party, whether Rahul Gandhi is a Janayudhari Brahmin or whether the Congress has been brainwashed, public has been brainwashed.
But there is a pushback. For example, with Modi, Trump, of course, many people saw through him very early.
Right.
With Modi today, for the first time, there is satire and jokes about him. Okay.
Right, that
so
has changed.
People
that
know
changed
that this is
media,
someone who is a braggart, who talks a great deal. So there's satire and jokes all over the place, and by lots of people who voted for him in 2014 as well. You know, and that is something which I think we should take heart in.
Right. Last comment, Mander?
No, I just feel that we have to sort of, all of us believe that come what may, this country belongs equally to all. There's no negotiation about this. You know, we don't have to reopen questions that were settled during the freedom struggle. And this freedom struggle is a battle of hearts and minds. I've just finished a book which is called Partitions of the Heart. I do believe that we've created, there's a new partition going on, and it is that partition that we have to address. And we have to address it with love, with solidarity, with all the things that we...
And as you said, civil debate.
And civil debate.
All right. Harsh, Mander and Ram Guha, thank you both so much for being part of the show. Thanks very much for watching.